thank you everyone for coming. This is very flattering. I want to start with a little story that often comes up when people, when the subject of apicursus comes up. The story goes that there was an apicurus that moved to a town, and the local Rav came to visit him, and they got to talking, and the Rav asked him, so, you know, I've never met someone who doesn't believe before, and I wanted to get your insight on the Gemara I'm learning. And the guy says to him, I don't learn Gemara, what are you talking about? And he asks him the same thing about the Mishnah. He's in the middle of it. He asks him about Tanakh, and every time the guy says to him, I don't do that, I'm not religious. And the Rav stands up, he's all upset at him, and he says, you call yourself an apicurus, you're not an apicurus, you're an ignoramus, you don't know anything, you're amaretz. This is the way the firm world likes to see us, because then we're not a threat. The problem with that, of course, is that most of us have learned Gemara and Mishnayos and Tanakh, and we've been to Yeshiva or Beis Yaakov, and most of us have also have an interest in philosophy, which the average firm person does not. The biggest problem with the story, I think, is that you can tell it just as well the other way around. So you can tell it about a firm guy who moved to town, and there really isn't a secular equivalent of a Rav, so we'll go with a college professor comes to visit him, because it's always a college professor in these stories. And he says to him, you know, I've never met a true believer before, a real Maimon. Maybe you could clear some things up for me. Sorry. Can you tell me, how do you deal with the similarities between stories in Tanakh and the ancient Near Eastern mythology? And the guy looks at him and says, what, mythology? It's a Zarah. I can't study that. The professor says to him, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up the source subject. What about, say, the literary evidence that the Torah is a composite document? And then the guy starts getting upset. What, Chas v'shalom, I should ever think that the Torah is man-made? Okay, I'm sorry. What can we talk about? Can we talk about, say, evidence for evolution, or can we talk about cosmological evidence for the age of the universe, or geological evidence for the age of the earth? And the guy says, no, none of that. All of these things, either the scientists are lying, or the measurements are messed up by the model. The world is 6,000 years old, and you can't convince me differently. And the professor stands up and says, okay, thank you for talking to me, but I see we don't really have anything to talk about. You say that you're a Maimon, but in order to really believe, you have to understand the issues with believing. You're not a Maimon, you're just an ignoramus. This sort of perception of us is why I write, to try and combat this idea that the firm world has of us, and even more, the idea that some of us have about ourselves. I grew up in Midwood, in yeshivish families, liberal yeshivish, which means that we watch movies sometimes, and you know, my father had a job and all that. But I went to very yeshivish schools, the kind of places where I had a classmate in 10th grade who got suspended for 2 weeks because he had a conversation with a girl.
Did they?
Yeah. Terrible, you know. And I was always the kid who asked uncomfortable questions. And when I was in 10th or 11th grade, the principal called me into his office, and he told me that I should stop asking these questions in class, because why should the other Bachman be bothered by my questions when they never think of them themselves? Which says something about them too, I think, but whatever. We don't want to disturb anybody with questions. And as time went on, and the more I learned about stuff, the more difficulties I had. But I always assumed that the problem was with me. Because if everyone around you believes one way, and you believe the other way, what are the chances that everyone else is crazy? Right? It's got to be, it had to have been me. And then in late 2008, I think, I discovered the Jewish skeptic blogs, completely by accident. I don't even remember exactly how. And suddenly I found all these people who were intelligent and articulate and thought the same way that I did. And I found out that all the things that I'd been thinking about for the last, at that point, it was, must be 10, 15 years, had been explored by people with impressive credentials and laid out in excruciating detail. And more than that, it turned out I was right. Which was surprising, but nice. So this particular project is, it started back in 2017. My parents had come to visit for the weekend, and they brought all the front papers from New York. The Yated, which I'm not sure what they get. I think just to make fun of it. And you know, all these papers. And I was flipping through one of them, because I'm a masochist, and I found a full-page ad for a book that promised to disprove the evolutionists and prove that Yiddishkeit is the truth. And on top of that, the author was a guy who, when I was in high school and I was asking those uncomfortable questions, the principal of my yeshiva had arranged for me to talk to this guy to answer all my questions. And so the name caught my eye, and I said to my wife, really at the time as a joke, I should write a book proving that Judaism isn't true. And the more I thought about it, the more this really seemed like a good idea. And I started on it. I went back and I read through all the old blogs. I went back and read through a lot of the books I had that had brought me to this point, and I was gathering notes. At the point where my notes on the chapter, what was going to be the chapter on the Kuzari, exceeded 300 pages, I figured that has to be its own thing. Because otherwise it's just going to get out of hand. And from there, I realized also that the different pieces of what I was writing each had to be their own book. Either that or I was going to have a doorstop. The main thrust of the whole series that I'm working on, which the Kuzari book is the first, is to answer what I call the Taivas Kinar. The idea that the only reason that anyone would ever question the obvious truth of Yiddishkeit is because they're hedonistic cretins looking to throw up the Al HaTorah and wallow in their Taivas. And I know, at least for myself, if that's what I did, I'm doing a really bad job at wallowing. I mean, I've been married to the same woman for 14 years. I have no interest in going anywhere else. I'm not sure I've ever even eaten trade because I'm too lazy to leave the house to go looking for food. And my wife is from, and so the food in the house is kosher. And why would I go anywhere? It's just...
Well, you're here tonight, so...
Sure.
I think it's fine to take care of that after.
Yeah, I mean, I have no objection to trade food. It's just, it's too much trouble. But this is what from people tell themselves. This is what
Not even like triangle
religious
K?
people. What?
Not even like triangle K?
Hello, stop.
If you put it in front of me, sure. Well, Chol Stam, anyway, I'm not good on Chol Stam because Chol Yisrael is it's just a waste. It goes bad in like 2 days. It's called Tashbas. Anyway, what was I saying? Right. So this is a very, very widespread idea. There's Elchanan Wasserman wrote explicitly that the only reason that someone would deny the obvious truth that Hashem created the world and wrote the Torah is either they're an idiot or they've been misled by their taivas. You get it?
I don't know if I can want to say this on video. I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay.
So I'm so sorry.
Let's not
Yeah.
You should put a Q&A.
But I mean, that's the most explicit that I found. But this is a widespread idea. In recent years, I think it's been softened. Now the accusation is no longer that the person is evil. Now it's that there's something wrong with you. So either you're mentally ill, or Nebuch, you were abused, and we understand, you know, you associate Yiddishkeit and Fromkeit with pain, and you want to get away from the pain. Nebuch. But the idea that you actually think it's not true, that you came to that conclusion rationally, that's just that's unthinkable. And again, my point is to show no, this is, not only is it reasonable and rational to come to that conclusion, it's probably the more rational conclusion. So, I mean, I'm okay with people being firm. I have no agenda to deconvert anybody. If it works for someone, what do I care? But my family's all from, my childhood friends are all from, and I very much object to them thinking of me as broken. That's unpleasant. So again, that's how I came to this book. The Kuzari argument itself, just in case anyone is unaware, is the argument that the fact that there is a tradition about Matan Torah, that the Torah was given at Har Sinai in front of millions of people, that in itself is supposed to be a proof that it happened. Because how could it ever get started? And this is more or less what all Kuzari opponents say, that imagine the first person to come up with this idea. They get up before everyone and they say to them, your ancestors, your great-great-great-grandparents stood at Har Sinai and God himself spoke to them. And they would look at him and say, you're a crazy person. Surely we would have heard about that. Basically, the crazy people who come to the subway and start preaching at you, that's what they're picturing. Some guy walking into the subway, or getting up on a soapbox on the street corner and preaching at people, and people walking by and going, he's nuts. Of course, this isn't how these sorts of things develop at all. Myth development happens very slowly, over long periods of time. There may even be a seed of truth in the story of Matan Torah and Yetzias Mitzrayim. We know that there were Semitic slaves in Egypt. We know that sometimes groups of slaves escaped. And we know that there were Egyptian forts along the northern trade route, so it makes sense they would have gone south. And we know there was a group living in the Canaanite highlands called the Habiru, who were made up of escaped slaves and bandits and other social rejects, and often slaves who escaped from Egypt ended up over there. So maybe at some point a group of these people had some religious experience in the desert, and that grew over time. But 20 people trekking through the desert and having some experience isn't exactly Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. It's not that sort of awe-inspiring. It's just some people who had an experience. We give it 1,000 years, and now we have God himself spoke to our ancestors in the desert. And at that point, the Jewish people would have numbered in the tens of thousands, and they assumed their ancestors must have too. There's the other main pillar of the Kuzari argument, is that this is the best argument you can have for getting people to join your religion. That you tell them not that, I had a revelation, or I had a small group of people and they heard something, but that all of your ancestors stood in front of the mountain. God himself spoke to them, and now you're all obligated to follow what was revealed there. Surely, the argument goes, that another religion could have made this claim they would have, but none of them do. So it must be that Matan Torah really happened, and all of this is true, and we're all obligated to follow the Torah. Now, first of all, there are other religions that have similar mass revelation stories. There are many, many stories of public miracles. Some fairly recent. There was, if I remember correctly, in the 70s in Egypt, there was a sighting of Mary over a church. There was a miracle in the Hindu temples where they believed that the statues, the idols, were drinking milk. These things happen. People believe things like this. Tens of thousands of people witness this stuff. That doesn't make it true, and I don't think that any of the people who promote the Kuzari argument are converting to Hinduism or Christianity anytime soon. But aside from that, just empirical reality shows that it's not the case that a mass revelation origin story is the best origin for a religion. Christianity has an origin story where had 3 women saw Jesus rise from his grave and supposedly spun up from there. There are currently 2.5 billion Christians. No public origin story. 2.5 billion Christians. Islam has 1 billion adherents, 1.2 I think, billion adherents. Their origin story is Muhammad sitting by himself in a cave, speaking to the angel Gabriel. They seem pretty successful. Hinduism has also around 1 billion followers. It has no origin at all, really. Its origin is so far back, we don't know how it started. And it's more a loose collection of beliefs. Buddhism is a religion, sort of, which coalesced around the teachings of someone who didn't claim any revelation at all. He just said, hey, I had some good ideas, what do you guys think? People liked it. 500 million people. These 4 religions together account for 77% of the world's population. Jews are 0.01% of the world's population. About 16 million people. Of those, about 2 million are Orthodox. So, if the mass revelation origin story was really the best origin story, we should expect there to be a lot more from people, and a lot fewer Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists. But reality shows this is not the case. There's also that the Masorah itself, the very notion of tradition, is probably no older than the Greco-Roman period. The Romans had, the Greco-Roman philosophical schools had a tradition, I'm not really sure why, where they would establish, whenever a new leader of the philosophical school came to power, they would establish his lineage to the founder of the school through 14 links. Why? I don't know why 14, that's just what they did. And there are many examples of this. If you go through the links in Pirkei Avos, in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, there are 14 links. This was linking Moshe Rabbeinu, the founder of the school in this model, to the new school at Yavna, and establishing legitimacy. And the links that in Pirkei Avos don't match up. Some of them are hundreds of years apart. Some of them are very, like the Anshe Knesset Sagdola. These aren't. That's an institution. It's not individual people, and it spans hundreds of years. So and every other premise that the Kuzari is based on, every single one fails, and fails badly. It doesn't. It's not as ridiculous as it's made to sound, because the street preacher thing is just nonsense. It's not a good way to get people to believe in your religion, and the Masorah itself isn't even a real thing. It's something that's a cultural borrowing from the milieu in which Chazal lived. So, if anybody tells you that you left from Kite because you just want to follow your Titus, and asks how in the world did anyone come to believe in Matan Torah if it isn't true, if you read my book, you'll have an answer. That's marketing. So this, like I said, this is the first in what I hope is going to be a series of 5 or 6 books. I've started working on the next one, which is about the experience of leaving from Kite. And more than that, it's not so much about personal experience, though I'm going to have some of that, because the personal experience I'm most familiar with is my own, and I know I'm in no way representative of everybody. That's impossible. But there are certain universals that everyone experiences. It's about, again, the point is to answer the Titus Canard, and that certain things like people leaving and losing contact with their family, losing contact with friends. I know of people who have struggled, lost custody of their kids over this. Nobody does that because they want to wallow in their Titus. Nobody gives up their kids so they can eat cheeseburgers. That's ridiculous. Certain other things. Well, there was a few years ago, the Aguda Convention had as its topic adults at risk. And They posted the videos online, which I'm still don't understand. Either they don't understand that other people can see this, or they just don't care. I don't know. But one of the videos, the main speaker was Rav Shaya Cohn, who runs Priority One, and who incidentally owes me money for editing a book for him. But if anyone knows him, talk to him, that'd be great. He spoke on the new phenomenon of adults at risk. This was like 2 or 3 years ago, so I don't think it was new, but that's what he called it. And it was very interesting. He seemed to know all the reasons that people gave for leaving. Like, he could parrot them back, but he didn't really seem to understand them, because he explicitly said that these are things that are in the way of them coming back from Keg. But also, like, he didn't accept that these are reasons, they're excuses, right, for following your taivas. And he said everyone he sees, they're empty inside, they're dead inside, they wish they could come back. They went off to derech because they were testing to see if their parents really loved them. And so, his advice to everyone who was listening was to show love to people who've left. Show them that you accept them. And then, when you have them wrapped around your finger, you can bring them back. So he starts off advocating unconditional acceptance and love. This is wonderful, but only on condition that you then use it to bring people back. This is the problem. This is why I'm doing this. I mean, okay. Mainly I'm doing this because it's fun, but if I need to, have some sort of higher calling, that's why I'm doing it. Because people buy into this. And if I can convince from people, more importantly, people who are on the fence, that they're right, or that what they're going through is normal, and that they aren't crazy people, and that they're not, leaving because they're lusting after cheeseburgers, and they have good arguments, and the people who accuse them of leaving for cheeseburgers are doing so because they can't deal with the idea that someone reasonable and rational can disagree with them about something so fundamental. Anyway, that's my talk. If anyone has any questions.
I'll just speak up loud enough and repeat the question so everyone can hear.
Sure.
I can just pause
If you want. If you don't care.
No, I'm okay.
A lot of this is anecdotal, but it seems to me that a lot of the apologetics that are put forth by Orthodox defenders mostly focus on answering external questions, so like the age of the universe or evolution and things like that. There's relatively little focus on actually presenting positive proof for Judaism, like the Kuzari argument is. But it seems to be pretty unusual to find a Kira person or something focused on that. This is a sociological question, not a philosophical one. Why do you think that is?
Okay, well, I can speculate.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, the Kuzari argument is the only argument that's exclusive to Judaism. Though I did once hear a pastor make a similar argument, but not nearly as involved. All the other arguments, typically, that you find for Judaism, or like you say, against these external threats, are borrowed from Christian or Muslim theologians. And there is nothing quite as strange as hearing someone use Pascal's wager as an argument for Judaism.
Especially if they have no idea until you tell them.
Yes,
that it's
exactly.
Christian.
So we should all be Catholic. But I think that might be why, because, well, also, I think to them, and this is also something that I have an issue with, is being frum is the baseline. The assumption is that frumkeit is obvious. It's true, and it's obviously true, right? Avram Avinu, at 3 years old, sitting in a cave by himself, figured out that Hashem runs the universe. And if a 3-year-old can figure it out, surely it's obvious to everybody. But now some people are led astray by evolution or geology because they don't understand that the mob will change the world or whatever nonsense. Or, the people who say that Hashem buried dinosaur bones in the ground to fool us. And why they want to follow a trickster God, I'm not really sure, but it's an excuse. Really, all of these are ways to deflect challenges to frumkeit, so you can return to the baseline.
So the focus stems from the pre-existing viewpoint.
I think so.
Possibly.
Yes. Yes.
Is one of your books going to be about the argument that Jewish survival and disproportionate impact on the world is
Yes.
no evidence?
I don't think I'm going to have a book that only focuses on that, but there will be one eventually on arguments for Judaism, and that will definitely be one of them. Yeah, and I think the threat to our survival from imagination is severely overblown. Jews have, since the Korban Bayis Rishon, Jews have been a persecuted minority, but it's been, generally speaking, low-level persecution. Jews were restricted in the jobs they could have. We paid higher taxes, things like that. Real cataclysms, like frequent pogroms, those kinds of things, were very uncommon. They were common in the Pale of Settlement in the 1800s, and I think a lot of the film world now looks back at that as authentic Judaism, and that might be part of it. But for most of history, Jews suffered low-level persecution punctuated by cataclysms, like the Crusades, like Tafkatat. But generally speaking, people were fine. And more than that, when something happened somewhere, it was happening there. Like when the Crusaders went through the Rhine, that was something happening in Germany. And the Jews in France, and the Jews in Poland, and the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, they had nothing to do with it. They felt bad, they sent money, they sent support, but it didn't affect them. This notion that in every generation we might have been wiped out just simply isn't true.
The second argument you said about this mass revelation of the best proof that, first of all, the Christians and Muslims are both agreed that nothing's ever happened. So,
They do.
I'm not sure what exactly the point of that argument. Just repeat the question.
Right, so the question was the argument that mass revelation is the best proof. The Christians and Muslims both agreed. This is true. So number one, I have never come across a Christian or Muslim theologian making that argument for Matan Torah. Never. And right, you would think they would use it because it proves part of their religion also. But also, I think the argument from those who favor the Kuzari would be that proving Matan Torah proves Judaism. Now, if you want to layer something on top of that, like Jesus, you need another proof. And a mass revelation where God himself spoke to everyone and said, "This is my son." That would be, according to them, that would be the best origin story. Instead, you have a guy who wandered around, said some nice things, and was executed and supposedly rose a couple days later.
Do you think that argument, I'm not sure, do you think that argument is just as good? Just like mass revelation and just one person? I'm not.
Do I think that it's just as good as far as what? As far as okay, so I think there's a couple of things here. So their point is that this is the best argument to gain converts. That if I were to go to you and I'm trying to sell you my religion, because that's always their model. Remember, their model is the crazy street preacher trying to sell their religion. And generally speaking, this is not how religions work in the first place. People are born into it, or their friend is this religion and they learn about it and they become interested. But going with that model, someone trying to sell it. And also, I think that the reason that they use that model is because most of the people who argue for the Kuzari are Kirov guys. And they are literally trying to sell religion. But anyway, if I were to come to you and say, all of your ancestors witnessed something, or a couple of people witnessed something and now we would like to tell you about it, their argument is that the first should be more successful than the second. And it logically, it sounds good, right? It makes sense. But look at the world.
Yeah, but they would argue that the reason why you only see the religions that we see is because all the mass attempts failed. You don't disprove that is seen as the best way of starting a religion.
I'm not sure, what do you mean the mass attempts failed?
The attempts to make up that, meaning the apologetics for Judaism would say the reason why you only see Christianity and Islam is because
Right.
the other ones failed. You don't disprove the fact that...
No, the point is, right, if we have options of origin stories, and one is supposed to be the most convincing, the one that will gain you the most converts, then the religion that uses that origin story should have the most converts, right? That follows.
You can't use that argument for Christians and Muslims because they could agree with that and say that Muslims and Christianity is the way of development. So
No, but
it seems like it's like an argument. It's like a very technical argument you're getting about how they would argue about.
No,
You kind of have to have gone to at least one age.
I guess.
You know?
So the argument is from the way the argument is put forth, and I think Rav Kellerman says this in his book explicitly. He says that the Christians and Muslims needed this argument to convince people. They needed it. They needed a mass revelation argument, and yet they didn't use one. Why didn't they use one? Because you can't unless it's true. And my point is, they didn't need it. There's 2.5 billion Christians. Clearly, they were very successful. Yes.
Well, maybe the response is that the Christians have their own argument that 12 actual people, not anonymous people in the desert, 12 actual people held together. This story about Jesus rising from the dead, they said nobody can hold that conspiracy together like that.
Okay,
the Muslims
sure.
say Muhammad wasn't educated.
Right. Every religion has its arguments. I agree.
So I agree. I think our argument works. We have to say because they think those arguments are stronger than the mass revelation one, which very few. I think a few actually have, but very few.
Yes, there are a few, especially Native American religions. But yeah, the point again is that clearly other origin stories not only work, they work much better. Yes.
Do we know what kinds of hallucinogenic plants are in that desert?
Not to my knowledge, but there is a theory that the mun was sap from some bush that grows there. I don't know, maybe that's hallucinogenic. Yes.
Yeah, so generally you're talking about like bringing this sort of counter. So you're talking about this argument as the counter to the concept of people not accepting that it's not just pleasure seeking and hedonism that drives you away. And I'm wondering because most people who proffer that argument, it's kind of not like they look at these other arguments critically necessarily. What's really happening here when you push that button is, right, it's the concept alone that you're leaving unrational is very threatening, very invasive.
I don't expect to change those people's minds. I really don't. It's for the people on, it's for the people on the fence, really, for us. So, for instance, I've read several accounts from different people who kept halacha for years after losing belief because they weren't sure. They thought maybe the Yitzhahara is trying to convince them to do Averis, and it really is their taivas driving them. That's my audience. Yes.
And there is something to be said for the fact that, say 20 years ago, if you were looking into, okay, what is the truth about the world? Even if it's something I don't like, I'll do it because you only live once and you want to live a good life. And then you have the completely secular books that are often geared towards Christians and against Christian arguments. And then you have books like, I think there was something like The Thinking Teenager's Guide to Judaism or something. And then, so you're like, okay, well, this is obviously a crock of shit. But then the other stuff, you're not quite there yet. And so then you're kind of left muddling around on your own for a few years. So it is kind of nice to have something that is, I guess, speaking on terms that I think somebody who is yeshiva educated can better relate to.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why it's written in yeshiva idiom.
Yeah.
Is it really?
How do you speak with the audience, by the way?
How do you do this in print?
Very much so.
You know what?
But you could hear it in
difficult.
between the lines.
There you go.
Yeah.
You have to chuckle while reading it.
Are women allowed to read the book? Or are we too dim-witted to understand?
Oh, that's...
You're actually,
I
when you
hope
said,
not.
you actually got something wrong. You said that the whole nation was around the mountain, but I'm going to just quote from the Torah here. It says, "Vayomer el ha'am," and he said to the nation, "Al tikshu elisha." Don't approach a woman. That implies that people is men.
Yes.
And sure enough, when the actual
Yes.
thing happens, the list makes it very clear that he's talking to not people, but men. People equals men,
So
women equals women.
in-
Like,
in
don't
the-
be jealous of your
yes,
neighbor's
yes,
property,
yes, yes,
including
yes,
their wives.
yes.
And don't jealous of your neighbor's husband.
I agree. And in my planned book on Frumkeit, I'm going to have a chapter called the Women's Section, where I point out things like this.
And it's gonna be, there's gonna be no pages.
Put it behind the pizza.
Or you could have an entire book and then have a little section at the end and call it the men's section.
That's clever too.
Mhm.
That's not our
We were always taught that there was a whole nation, and that's at one point my husband wanted me to bring the kids when they laned Saras at Dibros. He wanted me to bring the kids because the kids were supposed to be there too, and all the neshamas. But that, I guess that's not in the text. That's just a later
Well,
addition.
I mean,
probably.
Yeah.
unfortunately, in the ancient world, and until fairly recently, women just weren't people.
Well, we were, but just not recognized as such.
Well, in terms of society's attitudes, obviously, yes, but
It's literally listed as property in the Ten Commandments,
know.
things you own and can be jealous of someone else having.
yes.
This is loosely related to your point about the 14 with Kirkayavos, 14 generation. Do you believe that if the Tzdukim would have the Tzedukim's version of Judaism at the time versus the Prushim's version, was the Tzedukim's version more true to the prior forms of
No,
Judaism or
I
not?
don't think so. So the Tzdukim and the Perushim are not as much of a dichotomy as we were led to believe. Basically, what happened was that Judaism was, for most of its existence up to that point, was a Mimetic religion. Most people were illiterate, and you learned how to be religious from your parents, from your neighbors. You did what everybody did. Then the Torah started coalescing, and this was done, as far as you can reconstruct, was probably by temple scribes, who, especially after the conquest of the Northern Kingdom, and the priests from the Northern Kingdom brought their sacred library south to Jerusalem, and that's when the Torah started to coalesce. And now this new sacred document was starting to guide the people who could read it, which were mostly the Kohanim. And they developed a practice that was that denied a lot of what had been until then the Mimetic tradition, which eventually became Torah Shabbat Peh. So they were different, but it's also the Tzduki tradition has not been read out of Judaism. The Mishnayos, which was a Perushi project, almost never quotes Tanakh. It relies on the authority of whoever is saying whatever they're saying. It relies on the authority of Torah Shabbat Peh itself, on the authority of the tradition. The Gemara's project largely was to weave the two together. And so there are a lot of sugyas that start. They ask me, no, right? We know this thing is true because of the tradition, because of Torah Shabbat Peh, because of the mimetic passing down. How do we know it? Where do we find it in the written Torah, in Tanakh?
What's funny is that first it's from this verse. We use that one all the
Right,
time.
right.
So,
So what they're
it's a different
doing,
one. They do this.
they're going
This is
through
very
Tanakh
hard.
and looking for a hook to hang it on.
Right. And what did they
Wow.
think they were doing? I think the key to the question asked is that culture is the content of other people's minds, and
Yes.
so are books. Right? Book is someone else's mind thoughts, but mimetic is like out loud or with motion, transferring the idea of one person's mind to another. And so are books, and occasionally they clash.
Yes. Yes.
So, when I learned about the concept of the Shalosh Regalim, right? So
Mhm.
part of it, everyone acknowledged that it was because we were, Jews were a largely agrarian society in which
Yes.
people were out plowing their fields, working their land, raising their livestock, and weren't in contact with the religion on a daily or even monthly basis. And so that those three big holidays were ways of bringing everybody together, reminding everybody you're still Jewish, you still have to pay your taxes, and do
Right,
the Jewish
that
stuff.
also.
And you've paid enough of your livestock to feel good about the fact that you've done your stuff, and then you can go home. And so the idea of Jews, doing, that we were that Judaism was a daily practice that was entrenched in every aspect of daily life
No.
at that time is total BS.
No,
It doesn't
more-
mesh at all with
more
even
than
what
that.
we were
Ar-
taught.
Archaeologists have found a lot of little figurines throughout Israel. These are basically household idols. The early Jews were not monotheistic at all. They wouldn't recognize what we do as Judaism, and they would wonder why we're not paying homage to all the other
It's
gods.
even further back. Even in the time of the Gemara, they're
Yes.
constantly saying that
everyone's
the
misbehaving.
Am Ha'aretz, we
Yes.
use it as the meaning ignoramus, but they didn't mean it that way.
They meant
it as the
people,
hoi polloi, the people. And they're constantly saying
Yes.
the people don't know any of this stuff, they don't do any of this
There's a
stuff.
discussion somewhere in the
Can you eat
Gemara.
in their houses? Can you trust that they were
No, but there's a discussion, I don't remember the
answer's
exact, but
constantly
there's a
no.
discussion
They don't
somewhere
know
that
this stuff.
discusses whether it's okay to kill Amaranths for fun, or something to
My
that
point,
effect.
my point is that they make it very clear that they are the elite who do these
Yes.
things, and the rest of people
But the
don't
thing
really know
is,
this stuff.
They were right about that. I mean,
Of course they
were the
It's
elite.
contemporaneous.
Most people at the time literally couldn't think the way we do. They thought very concretely, and the Amoram were some of the very few people who could think in the abstract. So imagine living in a world full of 10-year-olds. That was their experience.
Why would that be the case? Were they not as intelligent as people are
No,
today?
no. They had no reason to learn this stuff. They didn't go to high school and college, and they knew what was important to them. They knew how to make clothes. They knew how to farm. They knew, how to interact with their neighbors.
Life was much more consumed with
Life
just with survival. I
Right.
suppose.
And I think if you try to talk to someone with that mindset about abstract ideas, they would ask you, why are you bothering? Can I eat that? Can I touch it? Can I have a party with it? What would I want with it? Yes.
Just a point, I haven't looked into this fully, but there was a study done during the Soviet Union of peasants who lived off farmlands, and that they were completely illiterate, and they were incapable of abstract thought and
Yeah.
generalizing and things. So I think maybe that's what you're talking
Yeah, well, there's something called the Flynn effect, which is a sociologist. I think his name after him. His last name was Flynn. I think his first name was James. He discovered that IQ tests have been renormed every couple of decades because people's scores are going up. And he figured out that it's not things like mathematical ability or vocabulary. It's I don't know if you're familiar with how IQ tests are structured, but they're made up of subtests that pull for different things. And the ones that pull for abstract thinking, those are the ones that we've been getting better at, because as a society, we've been getting better at thinking abstractly. And he describes how he and his brother tried to convince their father not to be a racist. And they said to him, imagine you woke up tomorrow and you were black. And this is a thought experiment, right? And their father looked at them and said, what are you, crazy? Nobody's ever woken up one day and been black. He couldn't process it. Yeah.
I mean, that might be
Hmm?
that's the age, it's a function of age as
I suppose, I know, this is the story he tells to illustrate this.
well. Yes.
But
So isn't the fact that somebody would even write a book like the one that you wrote proof that it's not just about hedonism? Because if it were,
let's hope.
then wouldn't you be out doing hedonistic stuff rather than writing a book about it?
He's there for the coin. It's
No,
about
but the whole
money.
thing
He's
is
gonna
just-
sell
Oh, yeah,
copies and-
Look, you are so
Big
committed to your excuses.
Right.
Right?
You wrote a book
put
about it.
all this
Your
time and effort
excuses are
into
so complicated because you're such a smart guy
Feeling so
that
guilty.
you
have to come up with
are coming up,
I know.
came up with
and
a
really, we should all
400
just have Luna
page book
Pshuta.
on the subject just to excuse.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Rabbi Gottlieb got in touch with me like a month or two ago, and he told me he bought a copy, and I'm waiting to see what he has to say.
Great, go for you.
Has anyone
he
banned
still
it yet?
blogs?
Is what I
I'm
want to know.
hoping.
Because that's what really makes books take off.
I know.
You get a nice big band, put it on there like a haskama,
The problem is I'm not trying to sell this in farm stores.
Yeah, not gonna get
So,
it.
you're lucky.
That's exactly it. That's what got Slifkin in trouble.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
he was within that world, it was visible.
Yeah.
Like, you can go read like James Kugel or something. It's in like every bookstore on
Yeah,
Amazon.
they
They don't
get
care
in
at
trouble
all.
being
Right.
popular.
No, because it's so far. It's just.
It's outside
this
the
is
orbit. It doesn't
nonsense.
exist.
I mean, when I was a kid in yeshiva, I didn't know what biblical criticism was at all.
You want to get banned? Have it translated into Yiddish.
It's not a bad
Are
idea.
you offering your services?
I don't know any Yiddish. I mean, I know some, but
Too many,
that'll piss
there are
them
too many ideas that Yiddish
Savior Whorf hypothesis going around here? I don't think so. No. Oh.
I don't think Rebecca Gottlieb will be reading your book. I'm
No,
really
no.
surprised.
You know, he still blogs to this day.
Yeah, I know.
And every single one of his
He's
posts is just
responded
science is
to, like,
unreliable.
You know, has page articles that people have written. This is his obsession.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can just make a point. It's not a question. You did a good job explaining who your audience is and why you're doing it, because the front person argues that you're only doing it because of titles. So you're making a point that no, there's validity to the thought process. But in the Fry community in general, every now and then it pops up this idea, whether it's on a forum, a group, or in person, where people suddenly discuss, well, I left for intellectual reasons. What was your reason? And it becomes a thing that if somebody leaves for emotional reasons and not intellectual reasons,
Yeah.
as if that is in any which way less
No, I agree. And,
a legitimate
but I
reason.
want to
And my
differentiate
point
between
that
emotional reasons and Titus.
What?
I want to differentiate between emotional reasons and Titus. Titus is accusing the person of being evil and following their base desire because they can't control themselves. Emotions is something else, and everyone does things for emotional reasons. There's no such thing as somebody who does something purely for intellectual reasons. And you know, like, take myself as an example. If I'd been perfectly happy being from, I never would have looked into any of this stuff. I do what most people do. When I came across it and just dismiss it out of hand because, But I didn't like it. There were lots of things I didn't like. So when I came across things that contradicted what I had learned, instead of going, I went, oh, well, that's interesting.
Have you ever read Farnak Margolies' book, Off the Dara?
Yes, yes.
She makes, the thesis of the book is basically that point, which is that people leave because it's a source of pain.
Right.
Whatever the source of pain,
That's-
it could be intellectual pain, emotional
Right.
pain,
She
whatever it
says
is.
that a few times.
Ma-
That people,
that is the
the
thesis
from
of the
community
book.
pushes people out.
It's also like a really there's things that are missing from the book on purpose. Like sexuality does not exist in the
Yes.
book. No one ever leaves because they're gay or oppressed or repressed or
Sure.
doesn't exist in the book. Human sexuality is just not a part of humanity.
Well, I mean, she wrote it for an audience. So.
Because she can, because you have to get like
I just
Right.
want to
stomachs or
finish my
whatever.
thought.
Sure.
Yes, there's the difference between intellectual and emotional, and I think that's important that they're both legit reasons as to why someone is. But I want to take a step further, that even if someone is only doing it for titles, because, not yet, but that's what they want to do, that is totally okay too. I know the front person will use that and say, that doesn't contradict my religious beliefs, it's just
Right.
that that person is timeless. That is a valid argument for
Well-
someone, but it doesn't make someone who has titles wrong for doing it for the wrong reason.
No, but I think, no, you're right, absolutely. People should do what they want to because that's what they want to do. But I think from the firm point of view, the argument is that you're being, if somebody,
The argument is that
Yeah,
that's the only way.
no, I think the argument is that if Frumkeit is true, if it's really true, and when you die, you're going to come before the Bezdin Shamala and you're going to be judged and you're going to be punished for your sins, then eating cheeseburgers is stupid. Because it's a momentary pleasure and then you're going to suffer in Gehenna for it. That's just, I mean, everything we do is a cost-benefit analysis. And that's just, it's not worth it.
Well, I guess what I want to say is, I know some people who originally, when they didn't leave, but when they started living a non-religious lifestyle, it was purely, they believed that this is true, and it was purely because they wanted cheeseburgers.
Interesting.
But-
It's more of a Hasidic.
But,
No, I
I
was
was
also
saying,
saying, there are
but-
many from people who like
I wanna
eating
finish,
cheeseburgers who
finish.
also, they stay from and they just eat cheeseburgers. They're from people who are
That's
bad.
the
that's
point.
different, I'm saying, but some of
Yeah.
those people, eventually, once they are out and start realizing, wait a minute, the sky's not falling, nobody's being struck by lightning, then start saying, wait a minute, how do I know that that is really true? And this came first, and then they come to an intellectual reasoning, and then, when they have a conversation with someone who's they will say, the only reason you have questions when they bring up the questions is because you wanted to have fun. And my answer to that is always, maybe that's the only reason I have the questions, but now that I have the questions, do you have an answer?
Right.
That's
also-
the deflection.
Right.
Like saying
Absolutely.
you only
How
study
how
one
you
question.
arrive at the questions is irrelevant. Arguments
That's my
stand and
point.
fall on their
That's my
merits. Yes, absolutely.
Conversely,
Yes, and also, and I've had this conversation verbatim from people where they accuse me of being a gay whatever, therefore I'm not, anything I say is suspect. With complete no self-awareness that they suffer from the same thing. Yeah.
You mentioned that in the Buddha speech that he said that it's a new phenomenon and you thought that was odd. I think you're taking it overly literally. I think that it is something that's happening and they are noticing this groundswell or they wouldn't have had that speech. It is something happening. Like you notice there was this like spawn of blogs that caught you, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
orthodoxy
Well, I mean,
boomed.
what
and there was
happened-
about Tshuva movement, and there was a post World
No,
War II. There was a phenomenon
right.
that changed multiculturalism in America. Something happened, and then something changed, and they're noticing it too. They may be like not noticing as
Well,
much as like
the
people here.
internet, I think, is what
It's
happened.
part of it. Okay.
I think that's a big
The
part of it.
internet, I'm not sure
And
how
that
much.
the whole
There's a
internet,
neo-scholar
the
going on.
internet
Not
is
the
seeped
other
back
thing
into
This book is proof of a neo-scholar. Okay. I mean, it
I'll
is.
take that.